Hello, I'm Simon and welcome to the SciRob YouTube channel, and my trusty Dyson, which I bought back in 2006, finally gave up the ghost recently. Started behaving erratically on startup. It would turn itself on and off, and so I thought, well, I'd better take this thing apart and investigate further, because it's been a really good vacuum cleaner and I really didn't want to throw it away. So I was hoping the fix would be cheap, and it was, kind of. I was hoping it was going to be a little bit cheaper still, but unfortunately things didn't quite work out that way, and as you'll see as I go through this repair. So in short, I would say that for most people, just change the motor, because that's what I ended up doing. It was a very simple process, and I'll go through the motor change in this video, but I'll also show you the extra stuff that I was hoping to do instead of changing the motor, where I was just hoping to change the brushes inside. So but unfortunately that didn't work out. So the basic testing began just to make sure, obviously, the fuse in the plug was okay, the switch worked, that kind of stuff. And I got my multimeter, which has non-contact voltage alert, and it was telling me that there was voltage all around the circuit. There was voltage at the switch, there was voltage coming in, from the wall. So it looked like the motor itself was going to be the issue. But just to double check, I decided to get the multimeter on the switch itself, do a resistance test on the switch, just to make sure that the switch was actually okay. So I just popped the leads on, set it to resistance, and as I press the switch, you can see it going from open circuit to 0.6 ohms as the circuit's closed on the switch. So the switch was good, we had power getting to the switch, so really it can only be the motor. So it was then a question of getting into that. That's just prying. There's 4 lugs on this particular one, which need prying open, and it was kind of smoking gun evidence that the motor was knackered. Well, the brushes were, because one brush was okay, that one there, that was absolutely fine, but the other one was worn all the way down to the metal casing, and there was actual scorching around the metal casing. So it was going to be a simple job, just replace the brushes and jobs are good. But as I was checking the motor, I found that it had a bit of play as well, so I thought, do you know what, I'll change the bearings as well. So I was going to change the brush pack and the bearings, give the motor a clean up, and have a relatively cheap fix. And you can see the difference there, quite obvious which brush is the bad one. You can actually change just the brushes, you don't have to replace the brush assembly. You can prise up these silver tabs here and then prise up the gold plate, and that will then reveal the wire that's attached to the carbon brushes. And you'll need a soldering iron, because you'll need to get the old brush desoldered off the top of the plate, cut away any excess wire of the old brush, and then once that's all off, it's just a question of getting the new carbon brushes and slotting them in. So this is using the old carbon brush, but if you imagine this was a new one, you'd just pop the new spring in, put the new brush in with its much longer wire. It would poke out the top, and you'd just solder it to the plate on the top. And there's the worn brushes taken out, and they actually have a wear indicator on them, which you can see clearly on the one on the right. So it was end of life, and they are disposable items, so don't automatically, bin your Dyson just because the motor goes. So I was checking adjacent plates on the commutator, and I was getting variable resistors between them all, because there was 13 years of carbon set into them, and if I scratched the carbon off I'd get a nice stable reading. So I thought, whilst I've got the motor apart, I would clean this up. Now you don't have to take the motor apart. If all you're going to do is change the brushes, or you just go for the whole motor like I had to in the end, you don't have to do any of this. You just take the old motor out and replace it, and I'll show you the replacement later in the video. But I used my drill and a scouring pad, and that started to get it up okay. And then I used some reasonably rough sandpaper, and that did the job perfectly. Really got the copper shining up nicely, got all the old carbon off, and it was looking great. And then all I needed to do then was just clean in between the gaps, because that's kind of like the exhaust of where the old carbon brushes, the dust gathers. So I just cleaned that out with a 0.4mm feeler gauge, and we got good resistances all round then, nice and quick stable resistances. So to change the bearings I actually had a windscreen wiper puller that worked out to be just about the right size. So once again, if you're not doing this repair, there's no need to do any of this stuff, and you'll need, you know, a sort of specialist tool to remove bearings, because they're pressed on very tightly and it's pretty difficult to remove them without then damaging other components. But these pulled off okay. But if you listen, that's the classic sound of a worn bearing, just very loud and rough. So I've got some new ones. They are 608Z bearings, but obviously check on yours that they're the same. And they were about £6 from Amazon. So not too expensive, £6 for two. And listen. See, they're silent and you can't spin them freely either. They have a really nice drag on them, brand new bearings. So I used a 16mm socket to push the new bearings into the motor case. That was at both ends. And then I loosely fitted the commutator back into the motor case, and you just line up the lugs. Getting this case open is a pain in itself, to be honest with you, so you know. And then it was just using sockets to protect the casing, hammer it together, and there it was, spinning freely, looking nice and shiny and golden, all ready for the new brushes to go in. Screw those in, start up the Dyson. These were the brushes I got. It had one good review. It's got one terrible review from me, and since my terrible review there's been two good reviews, so maybe I just got unlucky with them. But this was the result after I turned on the vacuum. After about 30 seconds there was a definite electrical burning smell, and after about a minute it was making really bad noises. And as you can see at the bottom, that's all of the carbon dust that's been worn off the brushes within the space of a minute. You've got molten spring coils which have then embedded themselves in the motor housing. So it was no good. I had to bite the bullet and buy myself a new replacement motor. It's not a genuine motor. They're available on eBay. They're YDK style motors. There's different style ones for different Dyson, so do check compatibility. And to me it was clear it wasn't quite as nicely put together as the original Dyson, and so that's why I was really disappointed that I couldn't use the original motor just with a couple of carbon brushes. But for £20 you get a whole motor, new bearings, new brushes and two new filters. You get a new intake filter and an exhaust filter included, all for £20. So it was a simple plug and play then, just reconnecting up the wires, remembering to line up that arrow with the hole in the motor casing, and then put the reel back on. Make sure the grey coil retractor is standing upright, and the fixed part of the reel goes in that channel, the small channel on the right hand side, so the rest of the reel turns freely. And so I just did a test fit of the switch, just make sure that slots in okay. There was no issue on that. And off we went. So it was just connecting the cables back up and just making sure there's no cables snagged anywhere when you put the motor in. There's nothing. You tuck in all the cables around the white casing as well on this particular model of Dyson, plugging in the switch, tucking everything in again so that when I put the case back together, everything will just be all nice and easy. And that's the thing, if anything's really difficult to remove, there's a good chance that, or put back together, there's a good chance something's not quite right, because if everything's in place, these do take apart and screw together quite nicely and easily, really. They're really well made. So I'm hoping that this case will do the job, this new motor will do the job quite nicely. It was just a case of then just popping everything back on. You will need a T15 screwdriver, because they have T15 torque screws in everything. And it was just a case then popping back the filter, putting on the housing, pushing the wheels back on, plugging it in, and it came back to life, and I was very, very happy. And there we go. Thanks for watching. Hope you find that useful.